Hello, my dear friends. You're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of February of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, we're going to talk once again about the Geneva talks that took place between the 17th and the 18th of February of 2026. And according to information we have, the talks have already finished. And during the 18th of February, we received lots of very interesting statements and updates on this matter. The second round is completed. The Russian delegation is reporting directly to Putin on the progress of the talks. According to the Kremlin, the talks in Geneva lasted about 2 hours and were difficult but businesslike. So today's meeting took place 2 hours. Yesterday's meeting took place 4 hours. A new meeting will take place soon. That was stated by Medinsky. Another important statement was made by the US authorities by Steve Witkoff. Witkoff announced significant progress in the Geneva talks. It seems that he is bluffing. The publication follows the first day of discussions in Geneva. The parties agreed to report the results to their respective leaders and to continue working toward the deal. And when the meeting ended, we received a very interesting update from the Russian side. Medinsky is the head of the Russia's delegation. Medinsky held 2-hour closed-door talks at the Intercontinental Hotel before departing for the airport. Medinsky reported that after the main negotiations with Ukraine and the United States of America, he held an additional meeting with the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian Foreign Minister spokesman Tihi confirmed the agreement on the next meeting with Russia. So this is a very interesting thing. As you can see, the Russians waited when the delegation of the United States of America departed to the United States, and then the Russians had another round of meeting with the Ukrainian side. What exactly they were talking about, very difficult to understand, but some experts are saying that Medinsky sent a message to the president of Ukraine, Zelensky, from the president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So as of the open sources of the media, we don't know for sure whether the meeting was successful or not, whether the talks were successful or not, but there are lots of signals that are saying us that the talks failed completely. And first of all, we are talking about updates that are coming from Hungary and from Slovakia. Today, according to information we have, Hungary has stopped diesel fuel supplies to Ukraine and will not resume them until oil flows through the Druzhba pipeline resume, according to the Hungarian foreign minister. Furthermore, the Hungarians reported that they can stop energy supply of Ukraine if necessary. And something similar we received from Bratislava. Slovakia has declared a national crisis due to an oil shortage. Prime Minister Robert Fico announced that the Slovnaft refinery will cease oil exports to Ukraine and will redirect all production to the domestic market. So as you can see, and as we know, the Hungarians and the Slovakians most likely are very good allies of the United States of America, and the fact that they impose energy sanctions on Ukraine right after the end of talks on the territory of Geneva means that the United States of America told them to begin their economical attack. So we see that the situation is very difficult, and once again I would like to point your attention to my idea that we discussed during the previous video, that basically both the Russians and the Ukrainians haven't managed to find a solution what kind of question to use to ask Ukrainians during the upcoming referendum that most likely is going to take place in May of 2026. Once again, the Russians are demanding that the Ukrainian authorities will ask Ukrainians whether the Ukrainians are ready to accept the reality that they will be forced to move their forces from the territory of the rest of the Donbas. And the Ukrainians, Zelensky personally, wants to use the following question: whether the Ukrainians are ready to accept the reality along the line of combat contacts and to freeze the conflict along the current situation. So, telling the truth, there is a very huge, let's say, difference between these two positions, because the first one, the Russian one, means that the conflict may end in June or May of 2026. When talking about Zelensky's position, his question means that the conflict could be prolonged probably for another year or something like this. Now let's return back to Ukraine and let's discuss once again several statements that were made by Zelensky as well. Zelensky said Ukrainians would reject any peace deal that requires Kyiv to give Russia full control of the Donbas. Emotionally, people will never forgive this, never. Also, he emphasized that Zelensky stated that Washington and Kyiv have agreed that any agreement must be put on a referendum according to Axios. And according to information we have, according to Ukrainian position, 60 days of a complete silence is the main condition for holding elections. So Putin says one day, no, it doesn't work that way. Elections from the beginning of the electoral process to the counting must take place in silence and not under drones and missiles. So we see lots of different positions on this matter. Now let's talk about military things. We have lots of very interesting updates. The Ukrainian military authorities are in panic. Today we received this video where we can see how a Russian drone was flying probably over the city of Kyiv, and during this pass we see that a drone was dropped from the drone. So the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians began using a combination of Giran drones and FPV drones, which makes that this weapon double probably dangerous. The Russians first can attack any objects with an FPV drone, and then the Russians can use the Giran drone for the second attack. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. During the previous 12 hours we received lots of very interesting updates. And first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction, where the Russians continue their offensive operation. During the previous day, pro-Russian sources stated that as a result of clashes, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Krynychne. So these are the changes on the ground in this area between the dates. This is the end of the 17th of February and this is the end of the 18th of February. The Russians, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, according to different Telegram channels, as a result of clashes, established complete control over the settlement. And as we can see, according to this report, over this dense network of the fortifications. So basically the Russians finished the maintenance of line between the settlements of Tverkov and Zaliznychne. So now Russians control this entire territory, which means that the Russians have a very powerful positions right in front of the settlement by the name of Verkhnya Tersa. So we believe that in coming hours the Russians will begin their major offensive operation towards the settlement of Verkhnya Tersa. The Russians will try to attack the settlement of Gorka, and the Russians of course will start developing their offensive operation in the direction of the settlement by the name of Gulyai-Polskaya. So this is the next task of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, to establish complete control over everything along this red line. And if Russians are able to do this, then from these positions the distance between edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation and the city of Orekhov would be less than 20 kilometers, which means that the Russians from this perspective would be able to establish complete control over the northern logistic, and this is going to be the beginning of the battle for the city of Orekhov. And the city of Orekhov from this configuration would be caught in cauldron by Russians, would be caught in pincers by Russians from the west and from the east. At the same time, several pro-Russian sources stated this evening that as a result of clashes, as a result of counter-offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation by the end of the 18th of February of 2026 managed to restore complete control over the settlement by the name of Ternovate. I would like to remind you that pro-Ukrainian sources stated that during the previous days, Ukrainians recaptured the settlement as a result of the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, and today, for the first time since the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Russians have stated that they managed to recapture the key settlement in the Zaporozhye direction, which means that first of all, of course, the Russians will try to stabilize the situation, to maintain the lines between the villages of Ternovat and Bratske, and probably then the Russians will continue offensive operation in the direction of the settlement of Rzdvinka from the northeast and from the east. So it seems that we are on the edge, on the probably at the beginning of the greatest Russian or major offensive operation that most likely is going to start very, very soon. As for the Dobropolye direction, during the previous 12 hours, most of the updates we received from the settlement of Krynychne. Pro-Russian sources published lots of videos and lots of episodes of how they were bombing and attacking the northern and the northwestern parts of the settlement of Krynychne. So this means, first of all, that the Russians are moving their focus, their aviation focus, from the southeastern directions towards the northwestern direction, which means that the Russian troops most likely are moving with the aviation focus. This means that most likely the battle for the most northwestern part of the settlement of Krynychne has already begun, and maybe in coming days the Russians will finish the battle for this territory and the Ukrainians would be forced to fall back further in the northwestern direction. And from these positions the Russians will attack both in the western direction towards the settlement of Sergeyevka from the northeast, and the Russians will try to attack Ukrainian positions in the area of Dobropolye from the southwest, trying to outflank the main defense position of the armored forces of Ukraine. So in coming days we might see the Krynychne breakthrough from the Russian side. Now let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka. The most important update is that the Russians managed to break through Ukraine's defense in the southwestern part of the city, and the Russians managed to dig in deeper. Just yesterday we received lots of videos from the most southwestern part of the settlement of how the Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces of Ukraine using dozens of bombs. Some of these episodes are archived, some of these episodes are fresh, but one thing is clear: the Russians reduced significantly till ruins the southwestern part of the settlement and answered this territory. And this day, during the previous 24 hours, we received a report that Russians improved their position significantly, and the Russians are approaching the central part of the settlement of Konstantinovka, and most likely the Russians are not going to stop. They will keep advancing. But as of the next 48 hours, we believe that the Russians will concentrate their activities in the eastern direction with the purpose to outflank and to encircle positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the southern part of the city of Konstantinovka. We're talking about Ukraine's strategical positions along N20 and N32 roads. The Russians will try to maintain the lines in this area as well, and to unite two footholds in the southwestern and eastern parts of the city, somewhere along this red line, and then the Russians will continue advancing further. As for the Slaviansk direction, during the previous 12 hours and 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians were bombing and attacking positions of the armored forces through the entire territory with bombs, with artillery, with missiles, but as you can see, without changes on the ground. As for the northern directions, the Russians established complete control over the main logistic once again over the river Voskol. The Ukrainians are trying to bring additional reinforcements and reserves on the Ukrainians on the eastern side of the river Voskol with the purpose to stabilize the situation in the area of the villages of Kupiansk, cities and villages of Kupiansk, Kozlovoy, Podol and so on. But the Russians attack this territory and destroy everything that tries to answer the eastern bank of the river. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates in the northern parts of Ukraine. The first video, very interesting video, was published from the territory of the settlement of Seredny Burluk. In this video, we can see how the Russians, as a result of reconnaissance operation, managed to discover a temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine, and the sources are saying that the Russians discovered a temporary deployment point of another HIMARS missile system. And as a result of two Iskander strike, this camp was destroyed, and the Russians are saying that they managed to destroy the HIMARS system as well. So according to the author of this video, this is the 39th HIMARS system accounted by the brigade that is operating and working in this direction. Just imagine yourself, the 39th HIMARS system was destroyed by Russians according to pro-Russian sources. As for the Kharkiv northern direction, during the previous 24 hours, we received a very interesting video from the settlement of Veterinarna. It seems that the Russians are begun fighting for this territory, and it seems that in coming days the Russians will try to move their forces in this area with the purpose to capture this small settlement along the border. In this video, we can see how the Russians bombed a building with aviation bomb FAB 3000 or maybe FAB 1500, and as a result of this attack, we can see that the building was almost reduced to ruins. As for the Sumy direction, the most important update is coming from the area of the city of Glukhov, from the most northeastern part of the settlement that Ukrainians use as a launching site. During the previous 24 hours, the map has been adjusted. According to pro-Russian sources, according to the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, as a result of clashes, the units of the group of forces north managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Kharkivka. Based on these reports, we have adjusted the map. We believed that the Russians would continue offensive operation in the northern direction along the villages of Chervone Zore and Babylivka, and we discussed this during the previous videos, but now it seems that the Russians are trying to advance along this huge forest which is located on the Russian side of the border. We're talking about this big forest which is located along the border between Ukraine and the Russian Federation, and we can see that the Russians during the previous months managed to improve their positions basically along the eastern parts of the forest, and now the Russians are keeping advancing in the western direction also along the forest, which means that probably in coming days the battle for the settlement of Sidonok will start. Furthermore, the Russians during the previous 24 hours managed to discover positions of the armored forces of Ukraine in the area of the village of Bereza, and when the Russians discovered this warehouse, the Russians attacked this territory with the Tornado S missile system. As a result of attack, the entire warehouse with arms and maybe drones was destroyed. Furthermore, this evening, according to information we have, the Ukrainians launched another massive drone attack in the direction of the city of Moscow. The sources calculated up to 80 drones launched by Ukrainians during this evening. Maybe the Ukrainians will use even more. As for the previous 24 hours, during the 17th and the 18th of November, between these dates, the Ukrainians launched 85 drones in the northeastern direction. So today, another 80 drones, and most likely the Ukrainians will continue. The talks in Geneva ended, and the parties are returning back to the conflict and to the situation on the ground. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.